Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another video with Swaggle. And in this video, we need to talk about one of my favorite things to talk about here on a channel that discusses comic books. We gotta talk about data. That is right. This is going to be a data-driven video here on the channel today because we got some very, very interesting data courtesy of the team over at the SHORTBOXED app. So in this video, we're going to talk about the top 5 characters per age, gold and silver, bronze, modern, and talk about which characters sell the most in those various ages. But before I get into it, if you guys could drop me a like or comment or subscribe if you're enjoying the content, help support the channel doing these things, I would appreciate it. And also, if you want to support the channel, be sure to hop over to my Kickstarter for SANITY, link in the description. Lovecraftian pulp adventure, something I'm very, very passionate for. So I hope you guys take a look at the Kickstarter, give it a chance, maybe consider backing the project. But with that out of the way, let us get into this video here today. Now, just a few weeks back, I was at Cal Comic Con. If you guys happen to see, I made a couple trades, picked up a few books, great show, great time. And I happened to meet a couple of the team members over at SHORTBOXED. And, they went up to me. They were fans of the YouTube channel. They liked how I talk about lines, charts, and graphs. And one of the guys over there named Kevin was like, "Hey, Swaggle, I got that thing you like." And I was like, "What are you talking about?" And he was like, "I got that data." Now, if you guys don't know, SHORTBOXED is actually a comic book selling platform that is an app that you can download on your phone. So they were actually able to provide me with some really, really interesting lines, charts, and graphs that can give us some insight into which characters have the most demand and therefore which characters we may want to invest in. I just kind of want to show you guys these charts really quickly so I can kind of get into the good stuff. But you'll notice right there on the left that the bulk of comics being sold in terms of value actually comes from the silver age at 43%. Then you have a split between the bronze age and the modern age, which modern also accounts for copper, being at 23% each, and then a smaller portion for the golden age at 11%. But of course, that kind of makes sense. Golden age prices, as you can see on the graph on your right-hand side, typically average around that $900 price point. So of course, you're just not going to have as many people that can spend that kind of money on comic books. But I kind of want to focus a little more in on the volume of sales. This is the number of transactions that happen per age. And while you do see that the volume goes down, the older the book gets due to census count, I do still think that volume is a good indication to determine, demand for characters out there in the market. So if we count for all of the possible books and titles that these characters could be showing up in, which characters are seemingly the most popular, and that might affect our decisions on how we want to, spec or invest on certain books. Perhaps it's not any one single book that we should be looking at, and it's really the characters that we should be focusing on the most. Now, the first chart I have for you guys right here is the golden age of comic books, and coming in at the number 5 spot, it's probably no surprise, but this one right here is actually going to be Wonder Woman. Of course, Wonder Woman has titles like Sensation Comics, there's All-Star Comics, and then of course Wonder Woman in the Golden Age has her own title run called Wonder Woman appropriately, but she came in at the number 5 spot, and I would say that that's probably something where, what we know can be confirmed by what the data shows us, where we do think that, of those DC Golden Age characters, Wonder Woman probably falls around that, top 5, top 4 level. All right, let's take a look at the number 4 character that is the most purchased character in terms of Golden Age comic books out there. And coming in at the 4 spot is, of course, Captain America. Not to spoil it here, but Captain America at the number 4 spot is going to be the first and only Marvel representation because, as we know, Marvel didn't hit on all cylinders until we got around the Silver Age of comic books. But of course, Captain America comics, Young Allies, All Winners, those types of books, generally speaking, move at a more frequent pace than that of the books that associate with Wonder Woman. All right, coming in at the number 3 spot right here is actually kind of a little bit of a surprise, but we got to talk about Superman. I mean, it depends on how you want to evaluate the data for this character. Obviously, Action Comics and Superman, some of those books are the, grail of grails amongst Golden Age collectors. So it could be when we're talking about volume of transactions here, the price points are just too high for a lot of collectors to be spending on that character. And that's probably why Superman isn't going to be in the top spot. But, when we talk about number 2 and number 1, I think we'll be able to understand why the data is the way it is. But Superman, of course, a top 3 character easily in the Golden Age, probably a top 1 character. But over these last 30 days of the Golden Age, Superman is coming in at the number 3 spot. All right, the number 2 character in the Golden Age is probably no surprise right here, but it's actually going to be Batman. Of course, you have Detective Comics, you have Batman as well, and any book associated to the Batman character is always going to be highly in demand. I mean, it is really interesting to think about about, the totality of pop culture and which characters are the most popular, I think it is not to be argued that Superman, Batman, and Spider-Man are definitely the top three. A lot of people would think that Superman is number one, but it does really feel like in terms of, actual box office for movies, actual purchases of merchandise, and in this particular case, actual purchases for comic books, Shortbox is telling us that Batman is the number 2 most bought character, which begs the question, who is number 1? Well, this is a little bit of a cheat, but at the number 1 slot is actually no character. When we're talking about highest volume of Golden Age books bought, it's actually an amalgamation of books that are not superhero related. It's the Tales from the Crypts, the ECs, the pre-code horrors, the Good Girl art, the Frazetta covers of Famous Funnies. It's those types of books that make up the bulk of volume of transactions that are out there for the Golden Age. And that makes a lot of sense because that is a much bigger bucket than that of Batman and Superman. Now, if I was actually going to adjust this chart for value and not just talk about volume of sales, still no character at the top, Batman number 2, Superman number 3, Captain America number 4, and at the number 5 spot, instead of Wonder Woman for value of comic book, it would actually be the Human Torch. All right, let's hop over to the Silver Age of comic books and talk about this data set to figure out who the top 5 are for this era. Now, if I wasn't actually clear in how these things are being calculated, again, it is any comic book, any title that has a relation to that particular character. And coming in at the number 5 spot is maybe a surprising one, maybe a not so surprising one, but it's actually going to be the Silver Surfer. Of course, the Silver Surfer has connections to books in the Fantastic Four run, of course, Fantastic Four 48, 49, but he also has popular keys like Silver Surfer 1 and Silver Surfer number 4. So it does sort of, kind of beg the question a little bit of, as we look down into the future, perhaps there is still a big opportunity on this character, being that there is still demand without them being represented on the screen. All right, coming in at the number 4 spot, it's probably one that, is expected, although might be a little bit lower in this particular chart than you guys would have thought it would have been. But this one is, of course, the X-Men. Now, as popular as the X-Men are, we're of course talking about specifically the Silver Age section of their run. And while there are some keys for X-Men books, it's really not until the Bronze Age that they started to get hot and have the stories that people love, during that Claremont and Byrne era. Of course, X-Men number 1 is popular. Of course, there's keys like Sentinels and Juggernaut and Havoc and so forth. But if we really think about the books that are out there, it does make sense to me that they're actually not in the top 3 for the Silver Age. And speaking of the number 3 slot, let's actually open that one up right now. And this one is actually one that might be surprising to you guys, but it actually is going to be for the Avengers. Now, again, we're talking about Silver Age demand here. And when you do think about Avengers Silver Age, there's actually quite a few keys that are out there that a lot of people like to buy. Of course, Avengers number 1, a personal favorite book of mine. We have a lot of Kang books that have now been moving. We have a lot of Immortus books that have now been moving. Of course, Vision is always a popular character, always in demand. There's books like The Black Knight. So as far as volume of sales for Silver Age, Avengers is actually extremely popular. All right, coming in the number 2 spot, can you guys guess it? Well, if you guess Fantastic Four, of course you would be right. A lot of people like to buy up Fantastic Four Silver Age books, even though they are very, very expensive, there's still a lot of demand out there. Now, here's kind of like a little bit of a crossover for Silver Surfer. So these ones, kind of pad the stats on top of each other. But of course, there's books like Fantastic Four number 1, Fantastic Four 4. We have all the keys that were related to Wakanda Forever that have been moving, that have always been in demand. And Fantastic Four has, historically speaking, been a very, very popular comic book to collect. All right, of course, the number 1 spot that we have to unveil, I don't think should be a surprise to anyone, but of course it is Spider-Man. Spider-Man is the king when it comes to Marvel comic books, Marvel comic book collecting, and any book, specifically in the Silver Age that is related to Spider-Man is always going to have demand out there in the market. Of course, you have things like Amazing Fantasy 15, you got the ASM run itself, all the way through, first appearances of all the villains like the Kingpin, like Dr. Octopus, like the Lizard. A lot of these books always move in the market, are always in demand, and based on Shortbox's data, have the highest volume of sales out there. Now, if we were actually to adjust this for, what are the top 5 most valuable characters out there in the Silver Age, the only thing that actually changes is that Silver Surfer moves up. We're talking about, volume of transactions, but we're actually talking about, the value, like the bulk revenue that goes for these characters. It goes Spider-Man number 1, Fantastic Four number 2, Silver Surfer jumps up to number 3, Avengers goes down to number 4, and then X-Men rounds it out at number 5. All right, let's move on now to the Bronze Age of comic books here, and let's see if there's any difference between Bronze Age and Silver Age Age. I do think that there is going to be some crossover, but there are also going to be some differences as well. And coming in at the number 5 spot, which character is the most bought character for the Bronze Age in the 5th spot? Well, of course, that distinction goes to Wolverine. Of course, Wolverine during the Bronze Age has things like Hulk 181, Hulk 180, also Wolverine #1 by Frank Miller. There's also some ties, some of the numbers are boosted for Giant Size X-Men #1, but I'm going to save that book for a little later. So there are some characters that are going to surprisingly sell more than Wolverine, and the first character that is actually kind of surprising that we got to talk about is the one coming in at the number 4 spot, and that's actually going to be for Moon Knight. Werewolf by Night 32, Moon Knight #1, Marvel Spotlight 28, books like that, books coming out for Moon Knight in the Bronze Age are actually the 4th most bought of all of the characters out there. And it does sort of make you wonder, based on current prices and where Oscar Isaac might take this character in the future, it now feels like a really good time to make purchases on Moon Knight. And I know a lot of collectors out there don't like this character. A lot of people feel like these books have been overinflated and that, Moon Knight is actually like a D-level character. But I would actually make the argument that there's a lot of demand for this character. There's a strong support floor for them. And based on where the prices are now, over the course of the next, 5 years with Oscar Isaac doing his Moon Knight run, it does feel like there is still a lot of opportunity for this book. And speaking of opportunities, let's talk about the number 3 one right here. Now, this one is actually a little bit of a cheat, not quite a character, not quite characters, maybe more of a brand that we're talking about here. But coming in at the number 3 spot for the Bronze Age here is actually Star Wars. Any book related to Star Wars in the Bronze Age is always going to have demand out there in the market and seems to have a very, very high volume. Star Wars books in particular seem very, very seasonal to me as well. There's a high correlation of books moving in the market and whatever Disney Plus show is going on, like The Mandalorian, which, happens to be going on now. All right, coming in here at the number 2 spot is actually going to be probably no surprise, but we got to talk about X-Men. Now, X-Men in the Silver Age was, of course, in the number 5 slot, but it wasn't until the Bronze Age where they really started to shine. Of course, we're talking about things like Giant Size X-Men #1, X-Men 94. Think of all the Claremont keys that came out in this run, like Dark Phoenix, first Dazzler, first White Queen, characters like that. There's a lot of great books out there for the X-Men in the Bronze Age, and it makes sense that they would have the second highest volume, only second to, of course, the king of all books right there, where once again in the Bronze Age, top in the charts is going to be Spider-Man. Any book related to Spider-Man is still going to have the highest volume out there. Of course, you got great books like ASM 101, First Mobius. You got books like ASM 129, First Punisher. You got ASM 194, First Black Cat. Let's actually adjust the chart now for the values of comic books. Well, actually, the chart changes a lot if we look into it. Coming in at the number 1 spot would actually be X-Men, meaning they create the most revenue when we're talking about Bronze Age sales. Number 2 would actually be Wolverine. So, if you're talking about Hulk 181s, 180s, and I also do think that Giant Size X-Men #1 counts for that as well. Number 3 would be Spider-Man. So Star Wars actually falls off the list because the values for the Star Wars books don't match that of these other characters like Spider-Man. Coming in at number 4 is actually really interesting. That one actually belongs to Punisher, which makes you kind of wonder, maybe there's a lot of opportunity for that character. Of course, there's a lot of 129s that sell out there in the market, but of course there's Punisher, the limited series, and some other Punisher minor keys that are very important as well. And then very, very surprising to see that when you equate for value, Moon Knight is still hanging in there in the top 5, which again kind of doubles down into this idea that there might still be a lot of opportunity for this character in the future. All right, let's move forward to the last age of comic books and talk about the characters that sell the most in terms of volume within the modern age, which in Shortbox's case actually includes the Copper Age of comics as well. And coming in at the number 5 spot is actually, once again, the brand that is Star Wars. Now, this one actually makes a lot of sense to me because here's where you start to get a lot of, interesting keys related to the market for Star Wars. Of course, you have Star Wars Heir to the Empire, first appearance of Thrawn. You have Star Wars The Clone Wars #1, first appearance of Ashoka. You got first appearance of Revan. A lot of speculation now going on in this era, and there's a lot of great Star Wars keys that are out there. Coming in here at the number 4 spot is, of course, another character that is very, very hot once you establish them in the Copper Age. And of course, the character we got to talk about is Venom, of course, making their first appearance in ASM number 300. But once Venom hit the scene, there's a lot of great comic book keys that people like to pick up. Of course, Venom Lethal Protector, always a popular book that sells a lot, all the way through the Donny Cates one recently with the first appearance of Null. All right, moving on to the number 3 spot for for modern characters, we have to talk about, once again, the X-Men. Now, while they aren't necessarily the key of the modern and copper age like they were of the Bronze Age, there's still a lot of great X-Men books coming out of this era. Of course, you got first appearance of Gambit, you got first appearance of Omega Red, you got Mr. Sinister, all of those X-Key related books in the copper age, all the way through, the modern age, where you have, a lot of J. Scott Campbell, modern variants and things of that nature that are still very, very popular amongst comic book collectors. All right, moving on to the number 2 spot is finally a return of a DC character, one that kind of misses out during the Silver and Bronze Age of comic books, but comes soaring back here in the Copper and Modern Age. And of course, the one we got to talk about is Batman. Now, Batman, a lot of books out there that people like to collect. You have the ones related to Todd McFarlane, you have the ones related to Jim Lee. You got a lot of Batman keys right now that are moving thanks to James Gunn. Batman, no surprise, a top 2 character out there in the comic collecting market, and the data from Shortbox would definitely support that, which kind of sets us up perfectly for who, again, is going to be the top volume of sales for characters out there in the market. 3 eras in a row, the character that tops the charts in terms of volume of sales is going to be Spider-Man. Now, we have the Spider-Man era with all the Todd McFarlane books. We have cool minor keys when he debuts all of his different suits. And then we have, instant classics like the Spider-Man M&M cover. That is one of my personal favorite books that I like to talk about here on the channel. But kind of no surprise right here, when we think about, the characters that are still the most, transacted in terms of volume for the modern age. But if we do want to adjust this for, the value, well, the chart does change up a little bit. So X-Men slides down to the 5th spot, which makes a lot of sense. Omega Red, popular book to buy, but not necessarily a valuable one. Spider-Man actually drops all the way down to the 4th slot, being usurped by 2 characters that are derivative of the Spider-Man universe, the number 3 one, Miles Morales, and at the number 1 slot, we actually have to talk about Venom. Yeah, Venom, as far as value is concerned, is actually the biggest portion of the modern age. I think that has to do with the fact that there are a lot of ASM 300s that get sold out there, and that equals a lot of bulk of revenue for the sales for comic books when we're talking about this age. Well, that's all I have for this video. Those were the top 5 characters sold per age based on the SHORTBOXED App data. What do you guys think about the things that we saw in this video here today? Did any character surprise you? Do you think that there's some characters that are undervalued based on the demand that is seemingly already out there? Be sure to check out the Kickstarter for my comic book, link in the description. Thank you all so much for watching. Like, comment, subscribe. See you all in the next video.